October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and today in Mental Health and Me, we're talking more about the issue and what goes on in your mind that allows it to persist. Dr. Sheryl Ziegler joins us now. She's a psychologist and our 9 News parenting expert. And Dr. Ziegler, we want to talk about this. Can you talk about the cycle that occurs when people experience domestic violence?
Yeah, Kim, I'm really wanting people to understand that there is a pretty predictable cycle that happens in domestic violence, and it starts with tension building. So that can just be, your partner being very controlling over you, maybe limiting the friends and family that you can have contact with, and there's this clear underlying tension that feels like at any moment you're walking on eggshells or the relationship could just blow. And then what happens is there's actually what we call the acute battering incident, which can be verbal and it can be physical. I think a lot of people hear the word domestic violence and they think physical, and it is physical sometimes, but it's also very verbal or psychological. So that's in terrorizing you, just saying horrible things, screaming in your face, threatening you or other people that you care and love about. And then that happens. And then after that, there's a very predictable third phase of the cycle, which is we call loving contrition or the honeymoon stage. And in the honeymoon stage, that's where people, they promise they're never going to do it again, and they're being on their absolute best behavior, and you feel, like they're trying to make it up. And what we see is that this cycle goes through many, many times over before people seek help or try to get out of these relationships.
And it's important you to point these out because domestic violence isn't always physical. But when you think about the mental drain of all of that and sometimes the demeaning behaviors for the person that is the recipient of it, they question everything about who they are or who they once were.
They do. I mean, when people have been in a relationship that has had domestic violence in it, they're more prone to depression, anxiety, and their children can also be traumatized. So if there's children involved, they, by witnessing this, by living through this, can experience their own trauma symptoms. And I think it's also important to note that domestic violence can happen between a couple that is together, is no longer together, lives apart from each other. So I think people really need to think about expanding the view of what this really looks like, and just think to yourself, are you or someone that you know in a relationship that has these kind of qualities and characteristics?
And I'm glad you pointed out the children that are so often involved. I mean, we think we try to protect our kids from everything, but let's be honest, they see and hear a lot more than we wish they did. When you also talk about that and recognizing these things, and if people aren't even still together, how do you talk to someone if you fear they may be a victim of domestic violence, someone you care about?
Yeah, I think this is the part that gets the hardest, because what happens typically is a friend, a sister, a parent, somebody will say, hey, I don't like the way, that person controls who you can talk to and when, and it seems like maybe things are not good between you. And oftentimes you get defensive. That person in that situation can get defensive. So I think if you're the friend or loved one of somebody who you think is in a relationship like this, you need to understand you have to approach them gently. You may have to do it several times often. It definitely has to be in privacy. And you can also say to them things like, hey, I know that you're maybe not going to get out of this relationship right away, and it might take time, but I want to support you. There's resources, and there's also planning. And planning is actually a really important part of getting out of a domestically violent situation and relationship.
Yeah, we've sadly seen that too many times in the news when that plan doesn't work. So the resources have been across the bottom of the screen. Thank you for talking about this. We hope people seek out some of these resources, and others that maybe need to have that talk. Listen to what you said. Thank you, Dr. Ziegler.